Kelsay Shaw is a partner at Possibility Place Nursery, which probably most of you know. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Botany from Eastern Illinois University and has been doing work in the green industry for over 30 years. He's traveled the Midwest exploring native habitat to further his understanding of native flora and its relationship to local fauna, as well as the impact of fragmentation on these habitats. He has taught classes in native plants, lectured about their uses and environmental impacts, as well as handling a bulk of Possibility Place consulting projects. So thank you so much for coming. We really, really appreciate your coming.
My name is Kelsay. I am a partner at Possibility Place Nursery, and I have been doing many things with native plants for a long time. You most of it in the growing and seed collecting end of it, but a vast majority of my other work has been helping people kind of realize their native plant needs and their, we'll call it their little slice of environment. And everyone in this particular instance is going to be dealing mostly with a yard. For those of you that are not dealing with just a yard, I salute you. Um, Bigger pieces of property are their own nightmare, and I hope that you are all using natives for them. But for tonight's purposes, I'm going to be talking about the choices we make in gardening with natives. And the first thing that I always bring up is think about it this way. When you are looking for native plants and you are trying to procure them for your yard, or you're trying to make good native plant decisions, or just good plant decisions, there are a lot of obstacles. And the first obstacle is usually one related to what we'll call the abundance of the same thing all over the place. And this picture kind of it illustrates it fairly well. Everybody has seen this. You drive by almost any, excuse me, you drive by almost any business or new subdivision, a berm, or along any kind of, you know, jeez, I'm just tripping all over myself. My apologies, everybody. Uh, I'm sure you've all seen this. That's enough said. And the lowered biodiversity of these plantings isn't just an effect on the environment, it's effect on everything around it. It's in this particular picture, like I said, it makes me laugh because they both imprison the people behind in the business and the plants out in the ditch. And then they mow around it like somebody's going to be able to hop that fence and then hold a picnic right along the road. It is a lowered form of biodiversity. And when you lower that biodiversity, the consequences can be fairly dire. So, what I try and get people to realize is that they need to plant trees. I try and get people to then take these spaces and plant trees. And it's not always the best trees. In this particular case, when people do plant them, because of that scarcity of choice, people will tend to plant anything that they can get their hands on. And the outcomes aren't always the best. So they do the best they can in the spaces they have. But when you aren't given all the tools of knowledge that you would need to make an informed decision on what to plant and where, this in particular is a parkway, uh, it can be very frustrating. And once native plants start to die, the instant that happens, people usually, especially people that are new to native plants and um, that have that want but don't really have the knowledge base to make a more informed decision, they will quickly turn back to what they know. Or in some cases, don't know. Maybe they don't know how to define what a tree is, for example. It is one of those things that I, as a professional, especially ones that works with native plants on a regular basis, try and work with them to get through and to deal with poor environmental planning and help them make better decisions with plant materials so that these types of mistakes and issues don't haunt them and then make them do the easiest, fastest thing that they don't have to worry about. And the last thing in this particular line of thought is that there is a false equivalency for most people. They think that if something has flowers, that if it is green or if it will grow under those conditions, that, excuse me, it is just as good as any native under normal circumstances, and that is simply not the case. You can see here, this is a woodland taken over by periwinkle. Please, if anybody has that, set your sights on that and try to eliminate it as best you can. It is not a friend to to most yards. It is very problematic and has significant invasive tendencies. So when you see these types of environments and people like, oh, I love that blue flower, they'll get locked in and they have a hard time deviating from that plant or that plan that they have in their head. And what I try and do is help people understand that when you're planting with natives, it's a spectrum. All right. You can go all native. All right. Like you see up there at the top. Guy had canopy, he hated grass. He did what most native people can only, or native plant enthusiasts can only think, or dream about is completely, eliminate it and plant these beautiful and have the kind of results that are crazy nice. Or you can have the person below here who also hated grass and went about it in a different kind of way, but still planted native plants, just, imprisoned them in a field of concrete. You have to understand that when you are addressing landscape needs with native species, that it is not just one way to do it. There are many ways. Is in my particular, professional recommendation is always to read your site, take a look at the conditions that you have, and develop a species list that is best for it. So I'm closer to the upper picture and very far away from the lower picture, mostly because the environmental impact that I would like to have is one, positive, and two, I'm going to push for more diversified outcomes. That being said, a lot of people that come and talk to me about how I want to go native, I want to make in my yard more butterfly, more bird, more, I don't know, just more native species driven. And I'm like, great, I will do what I can for you. And this is a big home, but it is indicative of what our local landscapes look like today. Just a lot of grass, a lot of clip this or dwarf that, or species that are out of place and time and do not necessarily thrive under the conditions that they are planted in. And when they come to my nursery and they sit down and they want to, transition away from these types of landscapes, we try and get them to a place where they are at least as comfortable with the landscape that they're getting is the one that they're getting away from. Now, that being said, sometimes it's a big uphill push. Hosta in full sun, shade, plants that love sun planted in shade, you know, desperate for flowers that simply won't grow in the yard, so they have to put them in pots. It is not uncommon for people to do the best they can with the knowledge base that they've got and have a whole range of outcomes. Oh, excuse me. So the first thing that we do is we kind of take stock of what they do have, and we try and correct behavior of please don't treat that plant that way. You'll be much happier, or maybe you won't, but you should be more happy with the plant if you let it become what it's fully supposed to be. This is a picture of it's in this yard. It is a black haw viburnum or excuse me, viburnum prunifolia, and this plant typically is about 20 feet tall. They had it clipped to 6, and the only reason that they did this was because when they bought the home, that's the way that the homeowner the first time around had it clipped. And if you look closely, you can look above the little red flowers there. That's what it's like after 6 months of leaving it alone. So we start where we can to get people to start to embrace the potential of the plants. And after that, we transformed that yard that was all, you know, ornamental, kind of like we'll call it your run-of-the-mill landscape into something that is much more dynamic. They really like prairie grasses. We went with prairie grasses. This front little horseshoe, and again, this is a very large home, but this front little horseshoe was somewhere around 4,000 square feet. When we took half of it, and keep in mind the initial planting was maybe I think 500 to 800 square feet. We increased that and we took half of the available square footage inside that horseshoe. We planted 8 trees and about 500 to 600 prairie plugs throughout. And this is what it looked like a year later. In other areas of the yard where they were having other issues, I guess, and this could be anybody's yard. Let me rephrase this a little bit. My apologies. Um, if you even if you don't have space this large that you see here, transitioning any bit is going to be beneficial, any bit of it. And 100, 500, 1,000, 25,000 square feet, all of it's great. It's just a matter of what you're able to manage and how far you're willing to go. They had a drainage problem. They hated mowing, so we turned the whole thing into a bioswale. Now, I wish I had a picture of this later on, um, but you could see they killed the grass. I asked them to just mow it very, very short, and then we'll plant over it. He chose to kill it, and that's fine as well. But we planted about 3,000 plugs on 12-inch on center. And again, a year later, this looked like a functioning wetland waterway with every available species from iris to hibiscus. You could see some bald cypress and some swamp white oak to a many, many different other uh, uh, excuse me, other native grasses that thrive under those moist conditions. And we were able to do this because this area stayed wet for weeks after. I am stumbling all over. I am terribly sorry about that. We were able to do this because we were able to it drained the whole neighborhood, so it stayed wet for weeks afterward, and we were able to get away with a lot more species that like that wet condition that otherwise we would not be able to do. And these are the types of projects that I work with people to make those types of choices. Here's a couple of pictures of some of the outcomes. And in the same yard, I want to point out it could be very, very wet, and it also can be very, very dry. It depends on the size of the property, where you are, and where you're planting in your own soil profile. So, what is possible for people that want to plant in their own way. Well, there's a lot of possibilities when you're engaging with native plants or native plant landscaping. You can go the full native, like this guy here. He had trouble establishing grass. He was a bit of a carpenter, and he eliminated 90% of his lawn. His daughter decided that she needed a play spot in the backyard, but the whole front yard was turned completely into natives. Something like 80 species are in your vision right now. You can do like native edging. This is this we'll call this a this is an extreme example along a pond, but they were having trouble with water quality, and really they only wanted native plants down along the water to improve water quality and to beautify something that they were having a hard time beautifying. They were mowing it to the edge. It was quite, we'll call it an eyesore. And they went another way entirely, and it ended up with something unique and beautiful. You can do things like what I did for a friend of mine along along an alleyway, which we tried to make it. this is this is a terrible example. My apologies, but we tried to fix up, shore up a retaining wall and then also plant it so it would stop falling into the alley. You can solve particular needs with native plants. They have deeper root systems. They have wider ranging adaptability depending on the species that you are going to engage with. So if you have something that is very dry versus very wet in that previous picture, again, there is a range of species that will satisfy your needs. Or you can go full on crazy and plant them on your roof. This is a more extreme example. I'm a big fan of this type of, attempt. However, you need to know what you're doing before you get into it. Now, just a couple of quick notes. Dealing with native plant material typically means that you're going to be dealing with smaller size stuff. If you're buying from us, for example, at Possibility Place Nursery, you'll be buying 1 gallon, 5 gallon, 10 gallon, and 15 gallon material, plugs and all that kind of stuff. That's not what we're talking about here. This is for trees. A person can pick up the heaviest thing that we sell and plant it themselves. Native plants in general tend to are 10 native plants in general, especially trees and shrubs, tend to be grown smaller and are made more marketable and available to people that want to do it on their own. And there's a certain appeal to that. And the heaviest that most of that material, no matter where you get it, is going to be maybe 75 to 100 pounds soaking wet. That means one or two people can handle that planting. Traditional landscaping is significantly different. A 2-inch tree, which is the standard for most of what people are going to be buying for larger trees, those can weigh 400 to 800 pounds. And I can tell you right now, that is not something that is going to be doable for the normal person. And it's just too heavy, too big of a thing to do on your own and have successful outcomes. Now, if you're buying smaller from other areas of the horticultural industry, you have to be aware of a couple of things, and the quality of the root system, the type of species that you are buying. Typically speaking, when you are buying, let's see if I did I get that one in here. Here we go. When you are buying material from different kinds of growers, you need to make sure that that species and the information about that species is made available to you so you can make a more informed planting decision. When you're buying native plants, it is wonderful that you're buying native plants, but buying things that are from Kansas or um, California or Florida or Pennsylvania do not act the same way as they act here. It may be the same species, and I'll give you an example. The state of Illinois at Goose Lake Prairie planted, I think it was 100-acre plot of big blue stem. Now they had big blue stem on site on this property, but they had a contractor come in and they grabbed seed, and what they were asked to do is put down big blue seed and get that started up. And that was great. No problem. The issue that arose was that that seed was sourced from Kansas. And when the plants started to mature, it became very evident that even though they were the same species, genus and species, they did not act the same. The stuff from Illinois tends to be 7 to 8 feet tall. The stuff from Kansas tends to be 4 to 5 feet tall. The stuff in Illinois blooms, midsummer. The stuff in Kansas blooms 3 to 4 weeks, one side or the other. I believe it's earlier. So they weren't even interacting in the same way that made them biologically viable. And when you are planting in, especially going to embrace native species, it matters where you buy it from and then the information that is available to you. So I encourage all of you to buy regionally. There are a number of growers out there that do stuff like that. Of course, we're the best, but it is something that I would hope that if you're going to plant native species, that you're going to embrace buying as local as you can. Therefore, those species are going to behave in a way that is going to be beneficial to downstream systems. When I say downstream systems, I'm talking about your yard is usually uphill, and uphill from another yard or a creek or a forest preserve. That way you have positive influence down system from your yard. You're using locally native material to hopefully have a positive effect over a longer period of time. It is going to benefit those local populations that may exist around you in positive ways. I also hear a lot about how I don't know if you've heard this term recently, but there is it used to be nativars. Is everybody? I can't see anyone, so this is very almost surreal. I'm assuming you have all heard of nativars. And because of the bad rap, the whole idea of nativars got, uh, where it's just like, well, why don't I just buy the native? What they changed that name to is low low fertility low fertility species. So they're taking native species, they're saying they're making them prettier, they're making them better, and they're lowering their fertility. Therefore, I don't know why. I don't know why you would use a non-native or developed species in place of a native when you can, because there is a native for every segment of a garden. And the picture on the left is what our native crab looks like. There's all the fall colors that you could ever want, represented in about 20 species up on the right. I'm not sure what these developed species actually offer as garden plants, maybe as a collector's item. I'm not entirely sure, but I can tell you they are certainly not better than the originals, because you're talking about something that doesn't offer the same thing to the yard as the straight species would. And that straight species plant is going to offer pollen for your local bees and nectar for your butterflies, hosting capacity for those same species. Your birds, your larger, we'll call them charismatic megafauna, from squirrels all the way up to deer, are going to interact with these things in a much more favorable way than they will a lot of these developed and non-native species. Now, how are we doing? We're doing okay on time. Yeah.
Yes, we're
Um,
fine. Sorry.
okay, no worries. Um, Now, I thought about throwing up a lot of different species and talking about them individually. And I started looking at that, and I realized that one, we only have about, 35, 40 minutes to do this. And right now we're already almost at 30. I want to make clear that this is just a sample of the species lists that are good for anyone looking to start with natives. The Corlys americana is a fantastic full sun prairie shrub. The Cephalanthus occidentalis, some people would know it as buttonbush. Anybody that has standing water in the yard and is having a hard time getting a pretty flowering shrub, that one's amazing. Aronia would grow nearly anywhere. It's part of the Rosaceae. It is a beautiful shrub. Don't eat the berries. They do call it chokeberry for a reason. The juicing community, however, is really getting community. Are they a community? Anyway, the Aronia prunif no melanocarpa, Aronia melanocarpa, or the black chokeberry. Make sure that the berries are very, very squishy if you're going to eat them. Otherwise, they'll turn your face like straight inside out. It's Durvilla, again, under shade, beautiful shrub. Some people, dwarf bush honeysuckle. There we go. Lovely plant. Hummingbirds go nuts. That's the flower up here on the right. They're tiny little yellow flowers. The hummingbirds come to my yard every year, and I don't care how small they are, they hit every single one of them. The Sambucus nigra, variety canadensis. I couldn't fit it on there. My apologies. I was using too big of a font. But that plant is very, very common, but people candy the flowers. They can eat the fruit. Birds love them later in the season. Great for pollinators. The Prunus americana, or American plum, and its cousin Prunus virginiana are outstanding pollinator and bird plants. Not mostly because of the fruit, which they do eat, but there's a limited number of species, a much shorter range of species. It's the insects that they bring in. Lots of something like, I believe it's like 250 species of insects are hosted on the prunus, and birds love them. The viburnum species, too many to talk about. And likewise, the trees. Now, a couple things about the trees. And I want to be very clear about this. If you have a small space or a small yard, it's not a small tree that you need. It's a big one. And I mean like an oak or a hickory. All right. And the reason I say that is because people come to me like, oh, I have a small yard. And I understand the thought, but an amelanchier, for example, one, not really a tree. It's kind of a tweener. Can be both. Redbud's the same way. But that tree only gets about 20 feet tall, which means its canopy starts about 6 feet off the ground, which means it eats up a lot more space on the ground than an oak tree does. So an oak, even though it's like, oh my God, they're like 90 feet tall. Yeah, sure. Okay, they can get that. But they only take up about 4 to 8 feet on the ground, where an amelanchier will take up 20. So you're talking about losing that much space in the yard for smaller trees. Don't get me wrong, they're still beautiful. Am I going to plant them? Absolutely. But I'm planting them in concert with one another because one performs better, especially the understory one, the amelanchier, performs much better if it's planted with something big over its head. And that is always going to be the case with a lot of these smaller trees. Amelanchier, redbud, carpinus, or straya. You can see them in the list here. They perform better when they are planted with something bigger, especially planted close to them. Trees, and I wish I'd included that slide. I'm sorry, I forgot that one. Spacing on trees and shrubs, very quickly. Shrubs need somewhere between 6 and 12 square feet on the ground per shrub to, we'll call it, develop into, what you people would typically associate what a shrub's supposed to be. Which means that, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 feet, 3 to 6 feet away from each other, typically is going to be your spacing. However, trees, they require about the same space. There are no gnomes or fairies that live in the woods that move trees to the perfect distance. We've all gone for walks. We all love nature. When you're out in it, you'll see trees that are hundreds of years old, 2 inches apart, and they're doing fine. Can that happen in your yard? Absolutely. Will it happen in your yard? I cannot promise that. But when we are talking about planting trees and shrubs, spacing is not real. Is it beneficial? Is it good so that I know how much in capital I have to lay out to complete a bed? Absolutely. However, when I am planting trees, if I only want one tree, then I'm only planting one tree. If I'm looking in my yard and I'm like, I can fit four in here, and people are like, no, no, you can't. You can only fit two. You can absolutely fit four. Now, it's the development of those plants, and I can point to many examples, but I will tell you about one. There was a job that I did when I was much younger for a homeowner in Wilmington, Illinois, and she was in town and she wanted some big trees. She wanted something really, really big and something very, very different. So what we did was we took two bur oak and we planted them 6 inches apart, shaved down the ball, and we put them very close to one another. And we wanted to see, what would happen. She was on board and we did this. Today, and again, this is 20 plus years ago. Oh boy, I've been doing this for far too long. But 20 plus years now, those trees, both of them still alive, they are both over 45 feet tall and developing just fine. And that can happen with native species because if we use if we use trees of the same kind, oaks with oaks, hickories with hickories, or even we'll call it, loosely related ones, or planting an oak with a species that is normally associated with it, like amelanchier, like redbud, like the Celtis occidentalis. These species will all coalesce together. They will talk to one another. They will actually grow faster as a unit, as opposed to a tree planted singularly. Now, it's not always the case, but on average, trees planted together, I believe I was reading that they grow somewhere between 10 and 20% faster. And maybe competition, it may be that they're sharing resources. I don't know, but I do know the ones that I have planted together don't seem to be growing any faster than the ones I plant singularly until later in life. So when I see ones that I have together as a shrub border or a tree border or many trees in the same yard, as they get older, they seem to they seem to grow at a more consistently fast rate than ones that are all by themselves. Anyway, there's my short story on that. I should discuss these species very quickly. The amelanchier species, again, not a tree. Please don't treat it like one. It is a shrub border plant. It is a beautiful plant. Tastes great in muffins. Great, or straight off the tree. Birds love it. Insects, meh, they come to the flowers, but there's not a lot of interaction with it on a host capacity level. But again, if you're looking for a white flower in the spring and you're looking for something that's really going to pop, they're fantastic. You just have to be very aware that some years they last for a long time, And years like this year, some of them will, but a lot of them they'll flower, and the first big storm that comes through you, those flowers tend to fade quickly. The carya species, the hickory species, some grow fast, some grow slow. Well, yeah, let me rephrase that. Some grow slow, some grow slower. They do not grow very, very quickly. The thin-skinned or unshaggy wing of the family, the pecans, the bitternuts, those guys will grow twice as fast as your shagbark hickory or kingnut, but it's not that fast. So if I'm growing a bur oak and I'm growing a bitternut hickory, that bur oak will be 2 inch. That bitternut hickory will just start to reach 1. And an oak is going to grow somewhere between 24 and 36 inches in a year, where that bitternut hickory may grow 12. So just be aware that an investment in a hickory is an investment in the long term. They will, however, grow much faster when they are slightly shaded than they will out in full sun. The Carpinus caroliniana is one of those understory trees that you should definitely investigate. It's a lovely tree, especially for shrub borders. Celtis occidentalis, the hackberry, would grow on the moon if you let it. I promise you. Ironically enough, its Latin name, or botanical Latin name, it means sweet one from the west. They are pretty sweet. I wouldn't chew on the fruit. They'll break your teeth. Tastes a little bit like a raisin. The Astraea, fantastic understory tree also, much like the Carpinus, great for drier areas that you're looking for a tall border plant. Prunus serratina, the black cherry, beautiful flowers, late spring, early summer. Birds go crazy for their fruit, and they purple all over your concrete driveways. So something like that, which I do encourage you to plant, but just not over your cars. Tilia americana, lovely plant. And then oaks. For the love of goodness, please plant oaks. If you have room for one, plant another one. They are going to be the future of our canopy in the Midwest. If we are trying to have, especially long-term canopy, there is an oak for every place, and I assure you, many of them have spectacular fall color. Plus, they host something like 400 species of caterpillar, and you should probably know, for those of you that are bird enthusiasts, there are no better plants for the yard than an oak if you are a birder. Just chickadees will feed their brood a caterpillar once every 2 minutes per adult for the life of that brood. So that can range depending on the size of how many chicks they've got, or how many. It's not the size of the chicks, how many they have in their. And anyway, so that'll be somewhere between 10 and 20,000 caterpillars in a given year to feed the chicks. It's a level of productivity I don't know any other tree can match. And the kind of forgotten wing of our native plants, the vines. There are a lot of really cool native vines, and I don't really want to get too deep into the weeds on these, but there are vines that'll climb trees, like your Parthenocissus and your Menispermum, and your the bottom right picture here is actually the flower of the grape, the vitis. Beautiful things. They get huge. They'll grow up over everything. And then there are other species that tend to creep and crawl and lay on things, like your Lonicera and your native Celestris or the bittersweet. There are lovely vines that will hide a chain link fence or on a gazebo or any other type of we'll call it difficult to conceal landscape feature. Vines are very good at it. It's just a matter of knowing which one does what kind of thing. If you have never used the native honeysuckle, the Lonicera reticulata, as a wonderful introduction into kind of the low creeping vine-like plants, tends to kind of drape on things. Hummingbirds love it. Birds love the fruit. Brown thrashers nest in them at the nursery all the time. And a quick thing about birds, they are a good, like I said, a good rule of thumb is that all plants are good for them, especially native ones, but it's not the berries that are usually the first thing they're going for. So if you're planting berry plants, you're like, this is going to be great for birds. You're not wrong, but it's the insect bearing plants that are far more beneficial because that's what they raise their young on. And pollinators. For those of you that are interested in pollinators, again, oaks are going to be your first bet always. They offer the most homes for bees and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's not just that kind of pollinator that most people think about. They think about the flyers, the pretty bits, like what people think is a monarch. That's actually a viceroy. The silver spot skipper here, the hair streaks. That's I cannot remember the common name of the bottom right one here, but its genus is Vanessa. These are lovely, lovely flowers that also need to have have homes and have things that are going to benefit them for feeding as in their flyer form. The more and different and variety, complete complete, more indifferent and more complete your environment is, will bring in a different set of pollinators in every season. And your set of pollinators that are suited to the plants that you're putting on your site, because that's what your site will support, will always be different than somebody who lives 3 counties away. There will be some crossover, but rarely will it always be the same. And that should be celebrated for what it is. It's like, oh, I want monarchs. Plant some milkweed. I'm all about it. See what happens. But if they don't come, expect these other ones to also benefit from these types of plantings. So please don't shoehorn species into something where you're going to, just because you're like, I gotta have that one pollinator. Well, the thing that it comes to is not, it's just it won't grow in the conditions that you have. Well, if you plant all these other things, it doesn't mean it's not going to stop and feed there. It just means that it won't lay its eggs there. So these guys are also looking for homes. And lastly, that false equivalency I talked about earlier, I decided to investigate it just a little bit. And on the left is your typical Annabelle hydrangea, and on the right is the native hydrangea. And I just set up a little bit of a test. I planted 5 or 6 of our smooth native hydrangea, and I planted 3 or 4 because I only had so much money to of the Annabelle hydrangea right next to it. And once they got big enough and they started flowering in, we'll call it roughly the same amount, I started going out and counting. Myself and the staff at the nursery, once every 15 or so minutes, one of us would go out and count, not catalog. We just wanted to see how many pollinators were on the native versus the non-native. And what we found was on the native in our particular yard, there were 12 to 15 pollinators that were crawling all over the flowers and actively feeding, butterflies, beetles, bumblebees. They were actively feeding every quarter hour on the native. And there was 1.5, this is the average, remember, and there was 1.5 on the non-native, the Annabelle hydrangea. And what we found later was, when we started to try to identify is, the 1.5 on the Annabelle was a predator, and it would fly over to the native, grab a pollinator, fly back, and have its lunch, kind of like, a picnic, I guess, because there was less traffic and it wasn't being bothered over there or something. But it was very interesting to us because what we witnessed is active choice on the pollinator's part. So if you want to do this at home, I encourage it as well. Plant that native and keep an eye, see what pollinators visit it versus ones that are supposedly good for pollinators. And I guarantee that you will see more on the native than you will on the non-native species. Do we have any questions?
Yes, I'd like to thank you so much for doing this.
Oh
And we
no,
really appreciate your talking with us about all of this. Um,
something's going on here.
yeah, you've got lots more.
Uh,
Yeah, thank you so
get
much.
rid of that.
I did want to ask a question.
Yes.
So what is your feeling about climate change and natives? What do you think about that? What natives do you look forward to for climate change? Or do
Um,
you look at Illinois, or for Illinois, are you looking for,
no, I'm
sort of
looking.
see some,
Illinois is shockingly large.
yeah.
I mean, I think it's 600 miles long or something like that, or 500 anyway. I mean, it's crazy, crazy long. And Illinois itself sits in, I believe, I think there are 12, 11, 11 or 12 biomes from the
Right.
coastal plain all the way up to the driftless area. There is a crazy range of habitat and species. Um, what we are doing is not really worrying about it all that deeply. I mean, it's not something that we're not aware of, but I'll give you an example. On a lot of the lists, is my camera off? Oh, there we go.
Camera's off.
There we
Yeah,
go.
thanks.
There's my ugly face. Um, in a lot of the lists, white oak is supposed to be hammered hard by the climate change. And they're like, oh, it's a species that's just not going to do well. Well, it's native all the way to Florida.
Hmm.
Okay. And if climate is going to be moving this far north, then it's very curious to me, why and I think it has more to do with the types of pests, the types of densities and stuff that plant may exist here in. And it's not that it's going to go away or it's a bad plant to put out there. I think it has more to do with the types of diseases and insects that were kept at bay by cold winters are not going to be, it's not going to be as shielded.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think that may have more to do with species selection. Am I still planting white oak? Yes, I planted four in my yard, and three of them are doing great, and one of them got hit by a limb and is not doing so great. And then deer, freaking deer. Ugh.
Yeah.
But it is very it's very telling to me that like they're like, oh, these species aren't going to do well. Well, they're probably going to be fine. Are they going to change the way that they are, the densities that they're in? Absolutely. Should we just be like collecting seed from Kentucky and bringing everything north? Well, a lot of that
Yeah.
has to do with our elimination of what plant migration used to be. Plants would travel north, travel north and south, east and west all the time as the environments opened up to them. And, it was a much slower process. But now, because of the speed at which things are changing, we're just going to have to keep an eye on the canopy that we have. Certain species are showing no slowing down. Bur oak, chinkapin oak. There are things like oak wilt and other issues that are starting to come in, but it seems to be hitting like if there's 50 trees in a population, it'll hit two,
Hmm.
you
Okay.
know, and some of that has to do with the time of year that people are pruning. Some of that has to do with the time of, if that tree is under a lot of stress, you know, it, it doesn't matter where it came from. If a tree is under stress, the things that eat it are going to come for it, whether, microscopic or freaking a pterodactyl.
Yeah.
They're not going to be a pterodactyl, but you know what I mean. It's just going to be a matter of that I think that's going to be the thing.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay, okay. And what about it feels to me as if there is a really booming market for natives, and that this really is kind of a turning better story than it used to be. I mean, is that what you're feeling? I mean, you guys are in the middle of it.
I've been hearing that particular sentence come out of different heads for the past 30 years.
Right,
It's a
okay.
it's a turning point. It is what there it's never been hotter. I think it's more broad than it used to be. People are planting, they're wanting native trees and prairie. They're being, that's why we as a company encourage people to be more mindful of the site that they live on. If you live in a woods, don't freaking plant a prairie. But I gotta have one. Okay, I'm happy to take your money, but I would prefer that you would have more positive outcomes. And as a grower, I want you coming back to me because the plants that I sold you are doing fantastic. But if you're planting, like I said, if you're shoehorning certain species into areas that they are not either traditional to or adapted to the soil type that you live in, the outcomes are going to be somewhat poor. And the popularity of natives is certainly is fantastic, but you want to make sure that you temper that with the like smart purchasing
Right.
so that it's like, oh, this is the hot plant. Please don't buy the hot plant. I mean, you can buy it if you got the site for it, but please be mindful that you have an opportunity like in a yard. Like I live out on the southwest side of Chicago. I've got about an acre to my name, and yeah, on that acre, I live in an old woods. I planted a couple prairie plants to kind of prove a point to myself, and I was right. They grew great for like 2 or 3 seasons. They looked spectacular, and then there was just this steady, speedy decline. Well, but the savanna and woodland, plants that are in the same, especially the grasses, they just took off, and now I've got like Carex rosea is just taking over parts of my yard. It's fantastic. I love it. But the like Sporobolus, which is a beautiful plant, yeah, it grows okay. I got one spot in my yard that it grows great, and that's right on the driveway because it's super hot. Otherwise it just does not want to. It just does not want to acclimate to my particular site.
Right, right. Okay. And it's about time to stop, but I just had to ask you though, you said mow down and plant over. Does that work? Does it work if you just mow
If you,
low and then
oh yeah, if you scalp it, you got to do it a
yeah.
couple of times, but you got to scalp the ever loving bejesus out
Okay.
of it.
Okay.
Um, People put that. Here's okay, real quick on that. I know. Uh, Spraying, there's a lot that goes into spraying, and if you don't know what you're doing, don't do it. Okay, just right off the top. However, covering things with cardboard takes, people are like, oh, I can do it in, 3 months. 6. That's the shortest time period that you're going to have. And you should probably put down one of those blue tarps, so you're not using, plastic, you're using something that's reusable, but you need to build heat, as much heat as possible. And it's not the oxygen starving that, I mean, that'll kill grass. That's great, but it won't kill like garlic mustard seed. It won't kill, some of the other issue plants, especially like say you got a problem with Campsis radicans, the poison ivy.
Yeah.
And no, it's Taxodendron or what? Ugh, I wish they'd make up their mind. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's not going to kill that. You need to build heat. And if you have the time to do so, that's fantastic. But a lot of people, they go out and they're like, I want to plant the yard today. Well, I have to be realistic and I have to understand it's like, look, don't drink the stuff, don't spray it when you're not supposed to. Please be careful and don't use it if you don't have to, please. But um, you'll never catch me advocating for it, but I do understand it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, we really appreciate your coming and, for talking with us all about this. And thank you so much. Thank you for your time and
My
all your
absolute
work.
pleasure. I hope you
Great.
all, I hope to see you all at the nursery. And if I don't see you at the nursery, just please, enjoy your nature and get out and do what you can for it.